All right, good evening, dear friends. We're going to hit mute all for this portion of the discussion, just so that we can all hear. There is an option, a little bit of a sophisticated option, where you can actually hit a hands raised, and I'll do my best to get to you. But now, let's get ready to start a very special session. I'd like to invite everyone who's joining us online, and I'd like to welcome our beautiful crowd, the nicest, the brightest, and most wonderful folks that are joining us here in person. And I couldn't be more pleased that we're able to fuse together two realities. My dear friends, at least on Ocean Drive, Chabad Ocean Drive, we're making history tonight because we are creating our first hybrid class throughout these long 2 years where we've been doing almost everything on Zoom. So we've been doing everything remote, but at long last, we are slowly finding opportunities to meet up, at least partially in person. And on the other hand, we want to make sure to provide an opportunity for those who are long distance or not yet fully comfortable coming on out to yet maintain the ability to stay connected. And so today we're making history. We have our hybrid group in person and online, and it's so wonderful. And I'm grateful to see all of you. And there are still some challenges. I just want, before we start, technology, and especially fusing the in-person and the virtual. And so we're going to learn this together. And I'm going to be the translator between the virtual group and the in-person group. So when there's a comment from the in-person group, I will try to paraphrase, so those that are in line are able to hear it, and similarly vice versa. There also is an option to write a chat. So if you have a question, you want to put it in written form, or if I'm ignoring you, God forbid, I'm not trying to on purpose. It's just we're juggling different things. So that's that. With that, sit back, relax, and thank you for joining us. For those that are, all of those assembled on inside, if you need to find the restroom, it's right back there. And we have coffee, and we want you to feel at home. And I'm so grateful again that we're able to be here together, such wonderful folks. I'm gonna try, no, let's start like this. So with that, let me welcome you to our 7th season, I believe, of the Jewish Learning Institute's adult education offerings through Chabad Ocean Drive. And tonight, I welcome you to our fantastic discussion, Outsmarting Anti-Semitism. Of course, anti-Semitism is really something important, very sensitive issue, and it's been on our minds from the beginning of time until this very day. It was poisonous hatred that continues to be a cause of grief and suffering for our people. You know, they say as long as there have been Jews, there have been two absolutely unwavering constants. And you know what that is? Anti-Semitism and Jewish jokes about anti-Semitism. You know, they tell the story in 1881, Tsar Alexander of Russia was assassinated, and a government official accosts a rabbi, and he tells him, "You know who's behind the assassination?" The rabbi says, "How should I know? I have no idea. But I'm sure the government's going to blame the Jews and the milkmen." So the guy says, "Why the milkmen?" Of course, the Jew responds, "Well, why the Jews?" And, you know, they tell a story about a young rabbi. He moves out to a town, not a large population of Jews. And, you know, the Jewish religion and the Jewish faith on the Shabbat, people that are Shabbat observant, certainly the rabbi, doesn't drive his own car on Shabbat. His wife goes into labor. He needs to bring her to the hospital. If you're just arriving now, please feel at home. Grab a seat. I know it's kind of tight, but find one of the empty seats towards the back, and we're happy to have you. And so this young, newly married rabbi, his wife is in labor, having a child, and they need to get to the hospital. He calls the taxi service, and he tells them, "I need you to send me a Gentile driver. I don't want a Jewish driver." Because in the Jewish faith, a rabbi who isn't driving on the Shabbat doesn't want somebody else who's Jewish to drive for them. And as the taxi's driving and the young couple gets in, he hears the radio and say, "Okay, driver, whatever, ID number 37, you have those anti-Semites yet?" They assumed they didn't want to have a Jewish driver, of course, out of anti-Semitism. And lastly, again, these aren't well-known anecdotes, but you know, we have a raucous crowd in the. And lastly, of course, the story about the anti-Semite who walks into the bar and he sees a guy with a yarmulke and the guy's really irking him. So he goes up to the bartender and says, everybody drinks on me besides for that Jew. And he looks at him and the guy just looks at him and smiles. And he gets so frustrated. He really wants to get this Jew. And so after a few minutes, he announces again, drinks on me besides for the Jew. And again, the guy just sits there calmly and he gives him a thumbs up. And so the guy goes to the bartender and says, I don't understand. What's wrong with this Jew? Why isn't he getting frustrated? We're singling him out. Is he crazy? The guy says, he's not crazy. He's the owner. So we deal with anti-Semitism and we deal with humor. And of course, unfortunately, this is not just an issue of the long past. We deal with anti-Semitism to this day. And, there were periods in recent history where we thought that anti-Semitism was something that was exclusively to be found maybe in the Soviet Union or during troublesome times in Israel. But of course, we know that today anti-Semitism is something that's still on our radar. And as a matter of fact, there've been a rise in anti-Semitic events and episodes. And recent studies unfortunately point to a whole variety of additional anti-Semitic issues that maybe we haven't seen in the past 20 years. And there are a number of studies, and I don't want to get too into the weeds of this. First, let's get our slides moving. Before we start, we're talking about anti-Semitism. We all have been exposed extensively to thoughts about anti-Semitism. Perhaps you've attended other discussions about anti-Semitism, and there are a lot of common responses, and we'll cover them and we'll get to that. But before we talk about the active response of anti-Semitism, it's essential that we figure out what happens on the inside, what happens to us when we experience anti-Semitism, and are there conditions, are there thoughts or feelings that we should try to cultivate from within, even before we get to opening our mouth, or even before we get to responding, be it lobbying or organizing some kind of self-defense crew or whatever we're going to end up discussing, whether we'll agree or disagree. I'm sure we have more than a few Jews, so we'll have many different opinions. But we really got to start from the beginning and think about how anti-Semitism affects our thoughts. And so I want to share with you not so long ago, just a few years ago, and I want this to be light. I don't want this to be triggering. We're going to keep it light. We're going to talk about relevant issues. But of course, we know that there was a terrible event in Pittsburgh, and we have some folks here in the crowd that are from Pittsburgh and some friends, many friends. And as a matter of fact, it was on a holiday. It was on Yom Kippur. It was on Sukkot, and we were sitting in the synagogue. It was a Shabbat, I believe, on Sukkot, and word comes in that there was an attack. And as a matter of fact, my sister lives in Pittsburgh, and it turns out that the Tree of Life congregation was attacked by a white person indoctrinated by white supremacy, killing many Jews, 11 Jews, wounding many others. It was described as the greatest anti-Semitic act in the States in American history. And of course, 6 months later, there was a shooting in Poway, which we all may be also familiar as well, killing Lori, I forgot her last name, but terrible events. And as a matter of fact, for us, not to get ahead of the conversation, that was a turning point in our security strategy. And that's why in the shul, if you attend Chabad services here on Shabbat, there is a security guard, because we take those events very seriously. I just want to show you very fast some statistics here. Studies from, let's see, this is from, and it's in your book. By the way, if you have your book, and I know some of you on the virtual world haven't yet got your books, but if you're in person, please grab your book. And if you'll turn to page 5 in the student handbook, figure 1.3. So you'll just see here a chart of anti-Semitic instances. This is from this is from the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, and they did an audit of anti-Semitic incidences in 2019, and they found that there was a considerable heightening of anti-Semitism then. And just take a look at the screen. Those that are with us, you can see that there's clearly some or considerable growth of anti-Semitic incidents. Now, granted, there are those that say that this is partially due to the ability to collect data online, and it's also, there's a lot of radicalization that is occurring online. But the fact of the matter is, we can see there's a concerning rise. It's something that's certainly on our minds. And if you're in your book, you want to turn to page 6, and you'll see figure 1.4, figure 1.5, anti-Semitic events are up in Australia and Canada. And so this is something that's very real and on our minds. And of course, most likely that's why many of us are here tonight. Again, I want to just point out, for those that are in person, there's no muting a human being. I want to welcome you. It's great to have you. Those that are online, you may be muted, but I want to welcome you to hit the button that shows you raise your hand if you have any input. And in a moment, I'm going to ask some questions, and I'm going to hit unmute, and we'll try to do our best. And again, I'm going to be the translator for those that are online to those that are in person, and vice versa. So as we said, we're going to talk all about how we respond as individuals, as an organization, as a community. And that's a very important discussion. But before we do that, it's important that we consider what goes on the inside. We have to consider our feelings, our thoughts, and to make sure that we're in a healthy frame of mind as we assimilate news events or personal experiences. And so there's a little bit of a problem. You might not, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think it's a little bit of a problem in that Jews responding to anti-Semitism became a primary facet of Jewish identity. So you have individuals whose entire Jewish identity is that they are conscious about anti-Semitism. Thankfully, there's a very important slogan, never again, a reminder that we can't allow hate and genocide to happen again, and to avoid any human being from being targeted by hate and atrocities. But the interesting thing, figure 1.6, so we're on page 8, you'll see that in a survey of Jewish Americans, this is the Pew survey in 2020, and people were asked, take a look, what is essential to being Jewish? And if you look at the very top item there, remembering the Holocaust. Now, we need to remember the Holocaust, don't get me wrong. But we need to make sure that the totality of Jewish identity is not exclusively that. And so let's think about why that is. Why is it important that our identity isn't exclusively thinking about anti-Semitism? And it has to do with a general issue, and I'm going to hit on mute really briefly. We're going to ask for brief comments here so that we can keep things going. How do I unmute? There should be a way, hold on. Here, I'm going to invite you to unmute. You don't have to. But the question is, what might be a motivator of a person that is a bully? There are bullies in school. Maybe you've been bullied, or maybe a kid in school has been bullied. What is a motivator? What does the bully want to accomplish by bullying? Noah, you want to go first? You're raising your hand.
Low self-esteem.
Oh, we can hear you a little bit. Okay. Noah says that one of the objectives of bullying would be to lower the self-esteem of the victim. The person's bullied, you put them down, their self-esteem suffers. Any other thoughts about bullies? What would be the objective of a bully? You want somebody in person. Hold on, Lynn, go ahead.
Bullies sometimes are jealous of the person that they're bullying.
It's plausible that a bully might be jealous, and so their jealousy is expressing itself through bullying, which is again a terrible thing. But that you're saying there might be something going on the person on the inside that is triggering. Wait, you want to hear once, and this person's trying to join. Hello. I sent you an email. Do you mind refreshing, or maybe look in your bulk mail? Just on the middle of the class, so it's a little bit hard to send to open up the email again. All right, I'm gonna try to text you. All right. All right, and folks, give me a second. Let's see if we can help this poor man get his link, and then we will be on our way. Oh, he texted me. Okay, good. Bear with me.
Having a good sense of humor. Priority for being Jewish.
All right, so we have a bully wants to put the person down. It's plausible that a bully is acting out of jealousy. Go ahead. Oh, Robert David Malo, you're on. Welcome.
Thank you, Judge. All
right. So who Lynn?
Apparently, it's possible plausible that the bully was bullied.
It's plausible that the bully also experienced bullying. Very good. Barbara or Jeff, do you have a thought for us about bullying?
Have a comment about bullying?
Yes, me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I have a comment.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Very simple, very simple. Smack them in the face, kick them in the balls, and that's the way it is.
So hold on. So Jeff says that's not a reason for a bully, but he says don't let them get away with it. You might want to react right away in a vigorous response. Okay, fair. One other thought from our virtual crew about bullying. What does the bully want to accomplish?
Show power. They want to show power.
They want to show power. They want to show dominance. And one last comment. Let's hear from Robert David Esquire. What might a bully? Go ahead.
Recording in progress.
I'm going to switch over here to a different device. Hold on a second.
All right. So, okay. Well, let's move on. So, of course, all of the ideas that we've said essentially is the bully's hoping to accomplish something to happen within you. They want you to feel anxiety. They want the person to feel diminished. They want the person to be off their game. And many times that is the effect. And so let's think of our anti-Semites for a moment.
What happened?
I'm sorry.
We lost your audio. Can't hear you.
Give me a thumbs up. Better now? Okay, sorry about that. You see, I told you we're going to learn together about this hybrid concept. All the folks inside, and then we have a few people also online. It's great to have you all. So if we're going to be utterly consumed by the anti-Semitism, we may be giving the gift of giving the bully, the hater, what they want. And so therefore, we need to consider ways for us to first manage our own anti-Semitism. As we said, you might not want the totality of our response to be exclusively wallowing, identifying as persecuted, and feeling the hatred. There needs to be more to Judaism. So we're going to go to text 1a. And again, because we're still figuring out this model, I'm going to do some of the reading tonight. God willing, as we get better at this, and I'm talking mostly about myself, we hope that we'll have the opportunity to hear from the folks in person and on Zoom. So this is from Deborah Lipstadt. She has a work on anti-Semitism. She is a preeminent scholar on anti-Semitism. She's a historian. And this is text 1a, page 9. And she writes as follows: most Jews immediately step forward when Jews anywhere are being attacked by anti-Semites. This is, of course, as it should be. What is regrettable, however, is that for some Jews, the fight against anti-Semitism becomes the sum total of their Jewish identity. Recently, a much respected Jewish community leader lamented to me that he regretted not having educated his children about Jewish traditions and culture. He was, however, very proud of the fact that he embedded within them a total intolerance of anti-Semitism. His kids were prepared to be at the barricade to do battle against hatred, many others as well. His comments, says Deborah Lipstadt, Dr. Lipstadt, made me sad. Anti-Semitism has become the drummer to which his Jewish family's identity marches. They know of Jews as object, not subject. In other words, what is done to Jews becomes much more important than what Jews do. This well-intentioned Jewish father deprived his children of a rich and multifaceted legacy. They have been taught to see themselves mainly as perennial victims. The seeds to the oppressor control over one's identity. It leaves many Jews, including this man's children, aware of what to be against, but not what to be for. So again, many people are thinking more about what is done to Jews than what Jews do. And of course, not to diminish the power, the effect, and the weight of what is done to Jewish people, but there has to be more to the story. Or if you want to take a look at text 1b, page 10, What drives us personally as Jews should not be persecution, but our tradition. As Barry Weiss, who's become very famous, she's from Pittsburgh, and she's a famous columnist. She was for a while with the New York Times, and now I believe she's an independent journalist. And she writes, the Jewish people were not put on earth to be anti-Semites. That can't be what Judaism and what Jews are for. That can't be the fullness of our contribution. We were put on earth to be Jews. Profound, powerful, and in my humble opinion, very well stated. In fact, if we're not using anti-Semitism to be the basis of our Judaism, but it becomes something that we overemphasize, that too is a problem. Because again, we're handing the keys to the car to the anti-Semites, to our haters, and then our children identify Judaism with the negativity of what's done to us. There's a famous saying, Oi, who knows this? You can unmute yourself. Oi, well, oy vey, yes.
Schwer zu sein a Yid.
Schwer zu sein a Yid. There's a saying that in Yiddish, which is, it's hard to be a Jew. And there has to be a pushback. If that's what Judaism's about, then our kids aren't going to want to be Jewish. So we have to say, it's good to sein a Yid. It's good to be Jewish. Because if our total identity is the pain of Judaism and the oppression of Judaism, then we're missing a facet. This is, of course, not to take the emphasis of our discussion tonight, which is about anti-Semitism, but part of the response to anti-Semitism is what we don't allow it to do to us internally. Now, before we continue, we have with us Reb Shmuel, my dear friend. He's in person. I'm so happy you're here. And I want to give you a chance, if you have a thought on what we're saying, to share with us. Or if not, we'll...
Anti-Semitism, I believe that when dealing with anti-Semitism, it's like the bully, the person in the bar. You walk into any bar and there's a big guy and he lacks self-esteem. He's got no self-esteem, but he's got muscles in his teeth. And there's the little guy sitting by himself, minding his own business. And that person personifies the Jew.
Yeah.
God forbid, he's reading something, he's reading Shakespeare, he's reading, I don't know if he is Jewish, he's reading the Talmud, and now the bully has got something he can do.
So
he can beat on this person. The problem we also have with anti-Semitism is not the bully, the idiot out there who walks into a shul, pulls a gun. It's the person who harnesses this anti-Semitism, and we land up with the Holocaust.
yes, so we're going to talk a lot of...
That is our problem.
So what Reb Shmuel just talked about is the dynamic where sometimes a Jew, by just being there, could evoke strong emotional reaction that's coming from a very unhealthy place. And I'm proud to tell you that that's going to be the bulk of our discussion next week, God willing. So words well stated. Throughout the course of our discussion, we're going to talk about, let me back up. So therefore, our course is not going to be exclusively about a rallying cry to get all of us to be mobilized with our totality towards the fight against anti-Semitism. It's going to be a number of responses, including the tools to not be bogged down by the negativity, as well as how to cope, how to address, strategies to reduce anti-Semitism, what is the psychology and the root cause of anti-Semitism. We're going to talk about the history of anti-Semitism. And of course, we're going to talk about one of the biggest issues today, which is the issue of Israel-focused anti-Semitism, which seems to be a big driver in the problems, as well as how to make sure that our children aren't, God forbid, swept up into self-hatred, which is another issue that we're dealing with today. But first, I want to ask you all a question. You could take a look on page 12, exercise 1.1, or on the screen. We're going to ask for a few people to share, but we're going to ask everyone to do it briefly so we can also manage to give a diversity of voices and also get through the series of important discussions. So the question is, have you ever experienced anti-Semitism? Have you ever been a victim of verbal or physical anti-Semitism? And after that experience, what were your feelings? So I'm going to ask for someone who we haven't yet heard from. Let's see. Dr. Moskowitz, are you there?
100%. I'm listening very carefully.
Would you share with us briefly, hold on. Would you share with us briefly an anti-Semitic experience and how you felt immediately after that.
Actually, I really didn't have much of that. I'm more concerned about Jews that are anti-Israel, we're our own worst enemies. Anti-Semitism begins at home, and we're the beginners.
So, Doctor, you're going to want to speak.
Personally, you want my opinion? I didn't have trouble. I spent 4 years in intelligence. I dealt with intelligent people. We had blacks, yellows. Nobody looked at this.
Thank you, Doctor. So let me give you some good news. You're going to want to stick around with us for all 4 weeks because we're going to talk extensively about what happens when we end up buying the message of our haters. That's an important discussion. But anybody here want to share an experience that you experienced anti-Semitism and how you felt afterwards? And we'll ask it to be concise for the purpose of the discussion. Who wants to share briefly?
Right, I'll share.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, it's not recent. It was probably back in about 1985, but I moved from Florida up to New York, and I'm an avid tennis buff. And so I went to one of the clubs that was there in Atlantic Beach, and I said, I would like to join. And he looked at me and he said, do you have a sponsor? I said, no, I just moved into the area. He said, well, I'm terribly sorry. We're not accepting any new members unless they're sponsored. I was livid. I was angry, but I walked away and I said, if this is the kind of a club that it is, I'm glad that I'm not going to be part of it. I was very angry.
So Barbara, I think you shared what is surprising to some, the most common reaction, which is not so much fear, although I'm sure many of us have fear, but it's anger and indignation at being.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing. Esther, did you want to share something?
I
Sure,
I can't think of any incidents offhand.
Okay, no worries. Ira, do you want to share very briefly? Do you have any? No. Okay. So I want to share very briefly. I'm not going to give you the full story because maybe we'll discuss that later. But in the area recently, several months ago, there was an individual who was not in his right mind, if we could be honest, who had clear, strong, passionate feelings of hatred towards Jewish people to the point that he left, and it was in the news, that he left some very offensive bags of waste at different houses of worship. And thankfully not at our Chabad, but it doesn't matter if it was, and of course, that was an event that we experienced recently. And I would actually say the same like Barbara, that the feeling is more kind of indignation. How dare someone in 2021 act in such a way? And so when we have these experiences, it evokes strong feelings. Some people probably, maybe, some people are thinking, and I know we're gonna move on, about fear, indignation, disappointment, anger. It's something that really gets to us. Pain and worry. So on the subject of worry, they tell a story. Baruchel, he lives in the shtetl, and he comes home late at night, and he's really all fadaiget, he's all worried. And his wife sees that he's restless, he can't go to sleep. And he says, Baruchel, what happened? Why are you so worried? And he says, remember I borrowed that money from Yankel? It's due tomorrow, and I don't have the money to pay him back, and I'm so worried. So Yenta opens the window, Baruch's wife, and she screams, Yankel, my husband doesn't have the money to pay you back. You're not going to see your money tomorrow. So the husband's all mad. What are you doing? How can you do that? He says, now you're going to sleep, okay? And he's going to have trouble sleeping. Sometimes we want to transpose wouldn't it be nice if we could get our worries onto somebody else? And so our haters want to paralyze us. They want to fill us with anxiety. Which brings me to a critical text from the Talmud on page 13, text 2. The Talmud quotes a very interesting ancient book of Jewish wisdom that somehow never made it into the Bible, the Jewish Bible, I should say.
I
Although,
don't have page 13.
if you don't have a textbook, God willing, we'll get it to you before next week. It's on page 13, and I'm going to read it to you very carefully. So just listen up if you don't have a text.
This is a good one.
You don't have a book, so just listen very carefully. And also, let me just get the slides up to date. I'm so busy looking at our dear friends here. So we're talking about dealing with worry and anxiety, and particularly what happens if we have worry that's not constructive. So let's see. It states in the book of Ben Sirach, sometimes called the book of Ben Sirach, It's a book, again, that never made it into the Jewish publishing world for some reason, but it's quoted in the Talmud. Do not allow anxiety into your heart, for anxiety has killed the mighty. King Solomon said the same. If there's anxiety in your heart, quash it. So Judaism says that if you could get rid of anxiety, that would be a wonderful thing. Now, that of course is an unfortunate, hi Aviva, that of course is an unfortunate teaching, because of course we know Jews, we tend to be a little more high-strung than the average. We're good at worrying. Some of us have PhDs in worrying. It's something that's part of the Jewish condition. But ideally, we want to overcome it. You know what happens when we're worried? Our mind goes in overdrive and we start thinking about all the hypotheticals about how things could go wrong. And that usually drags us into a place that leaves us feeling weakened and unable to respond the way we need to the problems at hand. And sometimes worrying also makes us see every rustling leaf and every movement in our periphery as an enemy. And that doesn't allow us to properly respond to that which is truly a problem. So worry can be unconstructive. It can lead us incapable of response or cause us to over experience enemies and threats. And that's not a healthy role if we really want to combat anti-Semitism and we want to really find ourselves in a healthy way. And particularly, as I mentioned, but I want to re-emphasize once again, the concern about how young people will feel about their Judaism if the vibes we're giving off is exclusively that of worry. So we're not saying not to worry about a legitimate worry. We're saying is we need to try to channel and inculcate a kind of balance between preparedness and worry that is productive and channels us to be prepared, but not to be hyper vigilant. So what might be some ways to deal with unhealthy panic? So we're going to go through some thoughts. These ideas are not the answer. They are pieces to a puzzle. Some people respond differently to things that cause worry. So what we're sharing today are some Torah teachings within the Jewish tradition about how to contextualize some of the concerns, some of the threats that we experience. And again, as I pointed out in the beginning, tonight, we're talking a lot more about what's happening on the inside when we have the experience. And the coming weeks will be to try to get into the minds of the haters and then how to respond, if they manage to infect us. So we're going on a little bit of a journey. And I know it's not a conventional reaction. Usually when we go to have a conversation about anti-Semitism, we want to get straight to the activism, which is paramount, it's essential. But we want to make sure that our activism is targeted, it's strategic, and it's effective. And so we want to start from the inside, from what's going on in our hearts. And so one of the teachings that we need to consider, or at least the Judaism asks us to consider, is the fact that, we'll see the idea in brief, and then we'll discuss a little more. We're going to talk about the miraculous, surprising survival of the Jewish people. So again, we're not here to diminish hate. We're not here to diminish acts that harm Jewish people. That would certainly not be our perspective. We're talking about how we contextualize and digest word of hatred. So Deborah Lipstadt, who we quoted earlier, a historian and a scholar of Jewish studies and Holocaust studies in Emory University. So she dedicated her life to the study of Jewish history. And what is the study of Jewish history? It's just about going from one event to the next event of anti-Semitism and Jewish persecution. And we've all seen those timelines. 1116, Jews are expelled from this town. 1132, expelled from that town. Right? We've seen all those timelines. And this is her expertise. And so in an interview, she was asked, based on her study of all the anti-Semitism, all the persecutions, and all the hatred, she was asked if she is worried for the future of the Jewish people. And her response was good enough that I want to share it with you tonight. It's in the book, page 14. If you don't have the book, I'm going to get it to you. Reach out to me after the class, and let's read it together. She writes as follows. The fact that we're here is such a historical anomaly, it makes no sense. So sometimes, she writes, when I'm asked about anti-Semitism, people say, how can you be optimistic in all of this? How can you see the positive? It's such a dreary situation. And Deborah writes, I say, because we shouldn't be here. The fact that we are here shouldn't be taken for granted. And so her point, the way I understand it is, we shouldn't be here, yet we're here because there's something miraculous, there's something supernatural, that the Jewish people not only survived, but they thrived. Now you'll ask, there are other civilizations that live throughout the history that have descendants living today, of course, if any human beings. But the reality is, what other group has been so utterly targeted for annihilation, persecution, and banishment from civilization? And yet not only have people who continue to live as their descendants, but continue to identify as Jewish people, and continue to survive. I'm sorry? And so our endurance cannot be, again, I'm sharing the Jewish perspective, the Torah perspective. Our endurance can't be a random historic fluke, a continued stroke of luck. Eventually, luck should have run out. The eternity of the Jewish people is really a biblical promise. And we'll see in a moment. So what we got to consider is not just the fact that there's persecution. So we have here on the screen a very touching image that I always think about, which is a Hanukkah menorah opposite Nazi headquarters in Germany. And so this picture of the menorah was lit just a few years before this building becomes one of the big sources of devastation for the Jewish people. And miraculously, the menorah actually survived, and the owners actually still have it, if I'm not mistaken. And we can Google it afterwards. I'll send you a link to incredible articles about it. And so you think about the horror of this moment. And again, I don't even want to touch the Holocaust for the moment, so let's just put that on the side because we're gonna have a lot of this to talk about. But the point is, in this moment, as we might be feeling fearful, we need to consider the fact that we're here today is a miracle. God's rooting for us, and there's something supernatural. Which brings me to a very fascinating historic event. And this takes us back to a country called Yemen. Yemen is a place where there's a lot of misery even to this day. If you study the news, there's a lot of concerns of terror and intervention and war and poverty. But in 1168, in Yemen, the Jews of Yemen were confronted with three distinct and devastating problems. Number one, there was a new fanatical Islamic cleric who threatened who decreed that the Jewish people must convert or be punished and put to death. At the time, there was a Jew who actually embraced Islam and started preaching that Islam was the successor faith of the Jewish people. And he was promoting that Jews convert and abandon their Judaism and become Muslims. Even worse than that, there was another Meshugana, another crazy person, who was going around town announcing that he was a Messiah, an imposter Messiah, giving Jewish people in a difficult time false hope. Now, listen, I'm a rabbi, and sometimes we deal with complicated situations, but I cannot even imagine what it must have been like to be a leader in Yemen in 1168. They're dealing with a threat of annihilation. They're dealing with pressure, spiritual pressure to convert to Islam. And then on the other side, there's some crazy person just playing with their emotions and promising fantastical blessings that were clearly not realistic. So where do you turn if you live in 1168 and you have this problem? And thankfully, there was an address. That address is none other than Moses ben Maimonides. And so Maimonides was then at his prime, and he was one of the most prolific Jewish leaders then and of all times. And a rabbi wrote to him a letter, please help me out. I don't know what to tell my constituents. And the Rambam sent back a response which survives to this very day. So we actually have the text of Maimonides' response. It's called Igeret Teman, the letter sent to the Yemenite Jewish community. And he explains that Jew haters have tried to use force to annihilate the Jewish people. They've used sophisticated persuasions to try to refute Judaism. But the Rambam Maimonides tells them that there's something unique and indestructible about the Jewish people. And he assures the people of Yemen that they should follow Jewish history. And just as the people in the past, the Jewish people, survived persecution, the Jews of Yemen too will survive. And you know what? Till this day, They are descendants of that Yemenite community. They don't live in Yemen anymore, very few. But there are Yemenite Jews that come to our shul and that live in California and in Israel and in New York. Descendants who continue to survive and be inspired by this teaching. And so if you want to see it inside, for those that have a textbook, it's page 15, text 4. And Maimonides writes to the people of Yemen, God assured our father Jacob early on that although the nations would enslave his descendants, treat them cruelly, and subjugate them, his children would survive and endure, whereas those who oppressed and enslaved them would disappear. Quoting the book of Genesis, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. Although on one hand they'll be trampled upon like the dust of the earth, they will also triumph, just as when people step on earth, or if you have a car or a wagon driving on a dirt road, the dust rises into the air. Israel will remain in existence, whereas those who tread upon them will no longer do so. Last paragraph on text 14. The Creator similarly assured us through his prophets will never be destroyed, he'll never permit our annihilation, and we will never stray from a nation devoted to its purpose. Just as it is impossible for God's existence to be nullified, so too God assures the Jewish people they too will not be nullified. And so Maimonides told this community, and maybe we'll find a kernel of inspiration from that teaching too, that God promises the Jewish people not to be annihilated. And so, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself with the slides. And so we've been through difficult times. The Jewish people have been through difficult times, and yet as a nation, we continue to survive. And we could find inspiration in the words of Maimonides to this day, as we build an internal case of contextualizing and taking into perspective all of the threats that we perceive. Does this mean the threats are not real and not disturbing? Absolutely not. It's just something we need to internalize as we prepare to respond to anti-Semitism. I want to add, and then I want to add an anecdote. I was reading this through and I was thinking to myself, you know, whatever I've said until now and what I'm going to say is pretty much the kind of thing you might expect a rabbi to say. Would you agree with that? But here's my point. Here's why I want to cover this material, even though you could say, yeah, I would have predicted it. What's Rabbi Label going to talk about? But my objective here is not just to tell you what you should think, because that's not really my role, but I want to share with you the behind the scenes of why and how Jewish people came to have these perspectives as far as our inner reaction to hate. And so we've just covered one perspective. This is not the totality of our presentation today, which is considering the long road of Jewish existence and the many threats and the fact that Judaism continues to exist. And I don't know if you saw the headlines. You know, over COVID, there was like, I think, what was the number? $173 million of real estate acquisition for Jewish centers across the globe by Chabad. And I think the number is higher than that. And so the point is, with all the misery, there's a lot of Jewish growth, there's a lot of Jewish vibrancy, and we should take that into account as we find the proper balance of responding to anti-Semitism. Ira, you wanted to share something or get a question?
Did you just help me catalyze this, that with the rise of anti-Semitism?
Oh, we're gonna go. I by mistake went ahead of myself. So give me a second. We'll go there and we'll discuss it. So that's point number one I want you to consider. Jewish existence baffles historians, baffles us, quite frankly, as we study it. And yet we can find inspiration. And so as we feel at unease, we read about what's going on in Iran, we read about Israel, we read about people that are hating Jews in America. Let's keep the bigger picture in mind. Now I want to share with you another perspective. Again, this is not the answer. This is another Jewish perspective that I want to put into our arsenal of inner thoughts as we confront and contend with anti-Semitism. And it's as follows. You are thinking, I'm sure you've thought this. It's great to know that the Jewish people are going to survive, but I'd rather not have the suffering that comes along with survival. I'd rather not have all the problems. I don't want to suffer. To survive and go through a terrible ordeal it's not ideal. It's not what we're looking for. So what I want to share with you is another thought, and I hope you'll take it with a grain of salt and put this into perspective. If we're studying the long road and the long history of anti-Semitism, there are facets of the anti-Semitism that we experience today that is better. I want to be careful here. but we might say it's a little better than the anti-Semitism of once upon a time. And I want to start with the fact that once upon a time, anti-Semitism was state sanctioned. The governments themselves, almost every government, and we study the history of every nation, including this one, and America has really been pretty fantastic. But there were times that there were state-sanctioned anti-Semitism, be it Jews are not allowed to live here, or Jews need to wear a star or a funny hat or a special cloak or pay a special tax, or only live in the Pale of Settlements, or are not allowed to be employed if they don't work on Saturday, the blue, right? Or you're not allowed to work on Sunday. Is that the blue laws? And so today there's a lot of hate, but if we think about it, most of the hate, forget the Middle East for a moment, is not coming from,
I didn't say my comment.
is not state sanctioned. There's a lot of hate. It's coming from individuals. And that in and of itself is terrifying. We don't want anybody to have hate, but it's already a slight improvement upon that. And so what we're going to try to consider is two different, well, that's point number one. Point number two is while there has been a rise in anti-Semitic acts, surveys show that anti-Semites actually are getting rid of some of the anti-Semitic tropes that anti-Semites once upon a time had. So the anti-Semitic sentiment, while still existent, is slowly diminishing and slowly deteriorating. Now, we don't want one iota of anti-Semitism to exist. We don't want 1 ounce of hate to exist. But there is some good news in the general sentiment of the populace, even as incidents of anti-Semitism rise. And Professor Sarna, Professor Jonathan Sarna, who's who studies, is a historian, and he studies particularly the Jewish experience in America, theorizes that one of the reasons why anti-Semitic acts are rising has to do with the internet and has to do with the fact that people are able to be radicalized. But on the flip side, it's plausible that along with the rise of anti-Semitic incidents, we can also have a decline in intensity of anti-Semitic attitudes. Sounds surprising, but that's what the same studies that show a rise in anti-Semitism are showing. Lynn, you're not buying this, are you?
The question is why? Why is the hatred so strong against the Jews?
We're going to talk about that. The entire next week is going to be all about the why. We're talking because I explained to you, we're starting from within and then we're moving outwards. So we're going from how we feel, how we respond internally, where they're coming from, and then how to respond, how to mobilize, how to communicate, and all of that. But yeah, why? Pretty crazy. So I just want to show you, let's go to text 5, page 20. This is from the ADL, Anti-Defamation League's poll on anti-Semitic attitudes. So we saw a poll of anti-Semitic incidents. That's on the rise. Attitudes is on the decline. So interestingly enough, actually, before you go to page 20, go to 18. So the way they surveyed sense of hate, it's kind of interesting. They collected a whole bunch of tropes that were commonly perceived and felt by anti-Semites, and they polled people. And here you can see some of the things they asked. And you wonder if some Jews bear some of these thoughts as well. But anyways, in 2019, it was down to 11%, which is a bad number, but better than the height of 29%. And so let's take a look now on page 5. I'm sorry, page 20, text 5. What are we missing? Go ahead.
Page 18 explains it.
Oh, no, I was showing you. Page 18 are the questions that were asked. And the numbers went down on the survey. That's page 18. 19 shows the way those numbers have come down. And then page 20 is the analysis that comes along with the survey. But first, I promised Ira, what were you going to say? Don't look too far ahead.
Just that the Abraham Accords were kind of apocalyptic in terms of a major plan.
Yeah, do me a favor. Hold that. You better keep with us because we're going to talk about Israel, and I think it's 3. So Ira wants to talk about some of the incredible developments and growth, and it needs to be acknowledged in the Middle East. So don't forget that. I'm sorry. I know some of you are muted. Anyone here had another comment before we go on? Brief comments. All right, there is the ability to unmute, but we're going to continue. It is heartening, says the ADL, that attitudes towards Jews have improved over the last few years and historically have declined significantly in America. This is Abraham H. Foxman, ADL National Director, at least then. On the occasion of our centennial, it causes us to take a broader perspective to appreciate how far we've come in 100 years. In 1913, there were no surveys like this, but anti-Semitism was rife in public and private expressions in universities, jobs, neighborhoods, health clubs. In 64, when we did our first survey, we found 29% of Americans held anti-Semitic views. In 2019, we're down to 11%, still a too high a number, but we've made real progress. So the incidents are up, the events are down. This is not to diminish those events. If you're a victim of anti-Semitism, the fact that there are less events isn't much comfort. But as we are internalizing this picture, we should try to bear that in mind. And our minds need to be strong enough to really bear these two contradictory and conflicting ideas, that you could have more events, but the general sentiment of the population is down. Having a balanced perspective on reality is essential for us to not become dejected and for us to put our anxiety in check. Why do we want our anxiety in check? Because we don't want to give the haters exactly what they're trying to get from us. That's point number 2. So point number 1 was we survived. It's miraculous, and there's something supernatural keeping us going. And so don't worry about Jews ceasing to exist. Point number 2, though, was, but I don't want the pain. I don't want the discomfort, and I worry about that. And so our answer was, we have to have the context of things are getting slightly better. That is not good, but we have to appreciate the gains that are being had. But the most important point, particularly if you're talking to a rabbi, is the next point we're going to make. So get ready. Buckle your seatbelts. Can you guess? Trivia time. Are you ready for trivia? Look at this. Can you see the screen, guys?
Yeah.
What is the most often repeated 2-word phrase in the entire Bible? By the way, if you came for nothing else but this, you're already going to walk out with something pretty incredible. Take a guess. Unmute yourself, please. But I only want you to shout out, what do you think the most common phrase in the Bible is? Who?
God is-
Joanne.
Fear not. Fear not.
Fear not. Oh, anyone else want to take a guess? All right. Hold on. Nisim, how did you know that?
I kind of cheated a little. I read ahead.
Okay.
Fear not. But
Forgive me.
I mean, I remember sort of reading in the Tanakh lots of fear not, Moshe, fear not, David, fear not, the Lord is with you. So
very, very good. Nisim, you deserve a prize.
thank you.
You can be proud.
Thank you.
So,
Don't,
I'm sorry.
isn't that one of the last lines in a Don Olam song?
Yes.
Fear not.
Yes. Fear not. So fear not is the answer. You know how many times? Okay, Nisim, now we're going to challenge you again. How many times does the word al tira, fear not, appear in the Bible? Take a guess. Fast.
200?
How much?
1,000.
1,000. Okay. Anyone else want to take a guess?
300?
Okay. Anyone else? It's a lower number, by the way. But
180.
okay, 180. And in-house, in studio, we got a 40. We got a 50. So the real number is 44 times the word al tira. That is the most often repeated phrase. No other phrase besides your "and God spoke to Moses" saying, or whatever. That's more common. But besides for that, fear not. So Yosef wins because Yosef said 50. So that was the closest number. Good job. But there's another 26 times that it says, fear not, fear al tira'u, don't you all fear, plural. And then someone's going to get a little happier when I say this, another 110 times, okay, there are other variations of the word fear not. So do the math over here, 110 plus 44 plus 26. Ira, you got the number? 170. 180. Approximately 180. Who said 180?
Me.
Noah, you get a prize too. Great job. So God tells Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and David and all the prophets many times, fear not. Why does this phrase appear so often in the Torah? I know you're going to think because Jews are prone to anxiety. So we need to hear that phrase very often. Fear not. But in truth, it's not just that. It's that the Jews had a lot of surahs. The Jews have been through a lot, and it's comforting. God doesn't just neglect our feelings, doesn't neglect our experience, but God tells us, I know you're going through stuff. Fear not. Al-Tira, which brings us, hold on, let's see. Here we go, just in case you wanted to see it on the screen. Sorry. Hold on. All right. What's the math? All right, so the number may have been a little more than 180. Our mathematicians are recrunching the numbers, but close enough. No, you can keep your prize. All right. So, one of the most eloquent poets of Jewish history is none other than King David. And one of the most famous chapters in Psalms by King David is Psalms 23, text 6, page 21, a song by David. And there's some variations in the translations. We'll go with this one. God is my shepherd. I shall not lack. He allows me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Even if I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. King David, a shepherd, creates a visualization of the protection and the care that God provides for him. King David knows that a shepherd has to be incredibly caring and sensitive to the needs and the conditions of his flock. And King David sees God playing that role. But that's not all. This line is incredibly important to a very famous figure in the recent past and in modern day Israeli politics. So we're going to share now a clip. I want everyone to give me a thumbs up when it plays if you can hear and see. I've optimized the sound, and let's hope this works out on the first try. Hold on.
In January 1948, in the dark hours of the Soviet...
Fear not. We're going to figure this out. Bear with me a moment. Strange. Hold on. All right, let's try this once again. Hold your... Hold on. It's a little long. All right, let's start.
In January 1948, in the dark hours of the Soviet Union, a child was born in Stalino who was destined to symbolize mighty struggles. A bitter, global struggle between the bald eagle and the brown bear in the throes of their Cold War. A lopsided struggle between terrifying tyranny and human rights, between brutally enforced atheism and the free soul of a believer, between monstrous anti-Semitism and a proud Jew, and between the temptation to collapse and the superhuman will to survive. Nathan Sharansky graduated from Moscow's Physical Technical Institute before joining the underground human rights movement, reclaiming his Jewish heritage and emerging as a foremost dissident and spokesman for human rights. In 1973, Nathan took the calculated risk of applying for an exit visa to Israel. He was denied and rose to the forefront of Jewish refusnik activities.
Well, I was in the middle of the struggle when the situation looked very dangerous, when some of my friends in Helsinki group were already arrested, when new wave of repressions against Jewish activists was clearly prepared. And at this time I received a note from my wife Avital through some American Jewish tourists. And together with this note, a small psalm book. And Avital writes that this psalm book was with me in the last year when I was trying to help you in different places in the world. And I have a feeling that the time has come to send it to you. And I opened the book, and I can't read there anything because I never learned how to read these texts. And also, most of the words I don't know. Many of the words I know, about 1,000 words, mainly of our daily struggle, prison, repressions, demonstrations, but not these words. So I decided I don't have time for these small things when I'm very busy now in organizing demonstrations and press conferences, and almost forgot.
In 1977, he was arrested on false charges of spying for the United States. But prior to the announcement of his verdict, he famously declared, "To the court I have nothing to say. To my wife and the Jewish people I say, next year in Jerusalem." Sentenced to 13 years imprisonment, he spent the next 16 months some 1,600 miles away from Jerusalem, in Moscow's Lefortovo prison, often in solitary confinement and in a special torture cell, before being transferred to a Siberian labor camp.
They bring me the list of things that they confiscated, and there is mentioned this small black book, not in Russian, and I understand that they are talking about this psalm book, which was sent by Avital. And then I remember this note which is sent. And I demand that they'll give it to me, and it was a long struggle. 3 years after I was arrested, they returned this book to me, together with the telegram from my mother that my father passed away. And it's, of course, it's difficult when, it's always difficult, but when you cannot be with your family. And I decided that the only thing which I can do, I will be reading this psalm book until I understand. And so I'm reading these hundreds of thousands of words where I cannot understand where the sentence begins and ends, and cannot understand more than half of the words. And then simply comparing between different places of these words, I try to find out the connection between them. And it so happened that the first phrase from all these hundreds of thousands of words was a short phrase of 13 very short words, which I understood fully. That is the phrase, Gam ki elech bagay tzalamavet lo ira ra ki ata imadi. It's from the Psalm Kav Gimel, and when you'll go through the valley of shadow of death, you'll fear no evil because you are with me. And that was very powerful. It was very important for me. And each time when they were taking it from me, I was fighting and on hunger strikes, refusing to work, sometimes refusing to eat until they'll bring it to me back.
He resisted and persisted with remarkable courage. His miracle dawned in 1986, when he was released in a prisoner exchange. Leading Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Shimon Peres, welcomed him to Jerusalem.
And even when they already took me from prison and replaced all my clothes, I was lying in the snow refusing to enter the airplane without getting this book back because I felt that all my strength is there. So that was the only piece of property which I took from prison, and all these years it's always with me, and it gives me a lot of strength.
The Hebrew phrases in Sharansky's Petite Black Book were authored 28 centuries earlier by King David, who reigned from the splendid city of which Sharansky dreamed, Jerusalem. It was he who crafted the powerful line of prophetic poetry that lent indestructible hope and undefeatable strength to endless generations of Jews in distress. Even if I must tread through a valley forged by death's own shadow, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. A fountain of eternal confidence generated on behalf of each Jew in every century in the face of the mightiest and most monstrous obstacles. You are not alone. God is with you. Walk with confidence. The Creator of the universe stands guard at your side.
Wow, beautiful.
Very good.
So we have those words.
Altina.
God is my shepherd. And we have, of course, the story of Nathan Sharansky and how he got through difficulties that I think is hard for most of us to fathom unless you lived in that place and went through those kind of experiences. And the point when we say that the Lord is my shepherd, the whole point is that it's not always easy. It's not always simple. One of the ways that we try to find strength as we navigate difficult moments, which of course anti-Semitism and hatred could bring, is the awareness that we're not alone. God is going alongside us and he's there with us. And knowing ki ata imadi, that God is with us, can be a profound consideration as we contend with the difficulties that life might bring. And this confidence is actually expressed every Saturday night. If you go to a synagogue or maybe you watch on Zoom, we try to broadcast the Havdalah. And words we read, Hinei el Yeshuati eftach v'lo echad ki aziv v'zimratia Adonai v'yehi li liyeshua. Indeed, God is my deliverance. I am confident, I shall not fear, for God is my strength, my praise. He has been my salvation. And so the point is not there is no difficulty. We try to remind ourselves that in those difficult moments, God is with us, ki ata imadi. And the same is for Jews in Israel. In exile, we're never alone. And that's text 8, page 23. Whenever Jews are persecuted, the godly presence is, so to speak, alongside with them. As it states, in all their pain, he is pained. So Judaism reminds us to consider Hashem, God, being with us. So what do we gain from trusting in God? Well, we're not always, in this part of the conversation, assured absolute protection, so to speak, but we realize that God is ultimately behind us and bringing us through it. And this is something that we can use to find comfort through difficult times. So the challenge is being alone. And one of the solutions is that we're not really alone because God is with us. Number 2, if you'll take note on the screen, sometimes we feel a lot of misery, but we need to also consider the good things that happen along the way. And so this is a question of perspective. This is not to tell a person going through difficulty that life's not difficult. That would be terribly flawed and unhelpful. But as we try to go through an internal process, and sometimes we feel overwhelmed with difficulty, we should try to mine, to seek through the misery and find moments of goodness. Because the point here is not about denying the difficulty or denying the oppression, but it's about having a balanced perspective to allow us to go through it, to rise above it, and to emerge stronger and more. So until this point, and we've spent a good bit of time, we've talked about different thoughts, different meditations, different considerations that our long Jewish tradition asks us to take into consideration as we contend with difficulty or the prospect of difficulty, to give us strength, confidence, so as not to allow our oppressors and our haters to have the last word, to not allow them to win the only thing that's not in their control, and that's our response, our emotion, and our feelings. And so the final point, Al Tira, God tells us not to fear, because even when things are difficult, he's with us and he's leading us through this. But of course, if I'd stop here, we would be terribly mistaken and we would be leaving out a most essential part of the conversation. And that is, so do we respond? Do we take action? And before we talk about advocacy do we protect ourselves? How do we protect ourselves? And what is the Jewish Torah perspective on the balance of intervention, taking care to make sure that those that hate don't have the opportunity to not be a soft target, so to speak. Sorry, let me just get through the slides. So we asked before about anti-Semitic events, and we asked, what was your response? And so I shared with you then, I'll share with you now. After the events in Poway and after the events in Pittsburgh, our shul installed cameras. Our shul makes sure whenever we have a large event, and then certainly on Shabbat or holidays, we have security. The question is, didn't we just say God is with us? God's our shepherd. He's leading us along. We have no fear. So how do we reconcile the statement of not having fear and the statement that I said that the shul, based on Jewish belief and tradition, hired security and installed cameras and is in touch with the police department, and we're frequently communicating about different concerns and issues? How do we balance the two? Aren't they mutually exclusive? And so to explore this question, we're going to go back a long time ago into a well-known text called the Bible, and particularly the book of Esther. The book of Esther, of course, is a story of one of the most prolific haters, the most prolific anti-Semites, Haman, and King Achashverosh, who sought to destroy the Jewish people with a horrific decree. Mordechai, the Jewish leader, recruits his cousin or niece to intercede on behalf of the Jewish people with the king and to beg for mercy. Initially, Esther says no, but eventually, because she says she'll be put to death, eventually she agrees, but not without first proposing a condition. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself with the slides. What was that condition? Text 10, page 25. Esther sent the message to Mordechai. Page 25. Go, assemble the Jews of Shushan. They should fast on my behalf. Neither eat nor drink for 3 days and nights. I and my maidens will fast as well. Then I'll go to the king, although it's against the law. If I am to perish, I shall perish. Mordechai went ahead, did as Esther commanded. And on the third day, after 3 days of not drinking or eating, Esther dons her royal apparel and stands before the king. And this brings us back to the very same question. Esther is trying to lobby the king. What made Esther appealing to the king the first time? Her good looks, her charm. Let me ask you a question. Try to think back, if you fasted on Yom Kippur one time, try to think back to what your personality was like and how you looked after 24 hours of fasting. Is that the epitome of charm? Was that you're looking your best? And so what's going on over here? Esther needs to channel her charm. She needs to make herself look as appealing, to be as strong, on her tippy toes, as witty, charming as possible. And yet she decides to fast for 3 days and nights. What's going on? Isn't she harming her chances? And so this brings up the very same question. What is the balance between human role and God's role? Is it all about diplomacy and using our best efforts, or where does God come in? So go back to the Bible. Those that join us in our weekly Parsha discussion, it's been going on for almost 8 years. Currently, we're studying the book of Judges, but we talked about the manna, the Jewish people in the desert, and how all they needed to do essentially was exist and be, and God gave them food from heaven. He cared for everything they needed. Then the Jews moved into Israel. There was no more manna. There was no more clouds of protection. They needed to be, they needed to do their best effort to survive. But in reality, Jewish thought teaches us, the Torah teaches us that in truth, even to this very day, while we do need to make our best effort, ultimately it is God that is sending the blessing. But God makes a deal with us. God says, listen, if we would see God intervening, then the world couldn't exist. We would lose our minds. And so we do a deal with God. God says, you, human being, make an effort. Go to work. Do your job. go to the store, provide for your family, go to the doctor. You got to do everything you need to do. And this will allow God to then miraculously send all the blessings he needs through nature. Sounds a little shocking, sounds a little counterintuitive. I hear you. But this is what the Jewish tradition and Jewish mysticism teaches us, that God uses nature to channel blessing. And God wants us to be in a partnership. So in the desert, God provided. Today we create, but our creation is a partnership. Not simply that God provides us the materials and we make the best effort. We create an environment that allows God to channel his blessings to us. I know you're thinking of the famous story of the father who's meeting the prospective son-in-law, and he asks, how are you gonna provide for your wife? God will provide. How are you gonna buy a house? God will provide. How are you gonna have a car? God will provide. Tuition, God will provide. So when the guy goes home, the daughter says, "No, you like my boyfriend? You like my fiance?" He says, "Oh, you guys a loser." But one thing's nice, he thinks I'm God.
I heard this before.
So, but Judaism says no, God will provide. But you got to go to work. You got to do your best. We have to act and give God the space to intervene. Yes. Oh. So here's the interesting paradox. Everything comes from God, but God has a world of concealment, and so we need to do our work, and then God sends blessings. But from a Jewish perspective, kind of like the joke, but here, God helps those who help themselves, or in our words, God helps those who make it appear as though they're helping themselves. In other words, and here's really what we mean. We all know that certain business prospects could be incredibly successful, but they could also flop. And certain medical interventions could be incredibly successful, they can also flop. And so in addition to our efforts, we need to allow God into the picture to maximize the success. And so we have a miraculous partnership where we create space. Okay, so coming back to how do we respond? Rabbi, do you let God be your insurance? Do you let God be your security? Or do you put a security guard? Do you hire the police? Do you have cameras? And the answer is the very same thing. God expects us to work in a partnership. In other words, a Jew who follows the tradition will do everything they need to protect ourselves from those who hate us and seek to do harm. We must do so, not only because it's common sense, but it's Jewish sense, it's Torah sense. Because if you want to channel God's miraculous protection, you want to channel God's miraculous security, we need to invite God into the picture. And so you'll ask the question, well, then what's the practical difference? You have the rabbi quoting the Torah saying you got to hire a security guard, and you have a person with common sense who wants to be protected, so they hire a security guard. Is there a difference? And so here's the rabbi talking again. Yes, there is a difference. Because we cannot underappreciate God's partnership with us. We cannot undervalue the fact that we want, again, this is the Jewish teaching, we want to have God to have a role. Because you know what? The best security guard can also have a lapse in judgment or be overwhelmed and overcome. And so we need to invite God into the picture. As I told you before, I'm going to tell you things that you expect from a rabbi, but I'm trying to explain to you the mechanics from the Jewish perspective about why it works this way. And then the next point is, if God also needs to be in the picture, well, then what is your primary focus and what is your secondary focus? So going back to the story of the book of Esther. So why did Esther fast? Why did she allow her looks to possibly decline? How did she let herself be a little schleppy and shvach and weak? And the answer is because God, Esther knew, as a Jew, you got to make your best effort. The Jews are going to be annihilated. You got to lobby the king for his support. But you also have to pray and channel and really bring God into the picture. And so Esther felt that to show solidarity with her people who are praying, the best way to bring God into the picture in this instance would be to fast, but also to put on makeup, and also to freshen up, and also to try her best to be charming. But I bet you she wasn't her best. I wouldn't be my best after a few hours of not eating. I cannot even imagine 3 days of fasting. But that's what Esther did. Because Esther followed this model where she's going to make her best effort, but God needs to be invited into the picture. Due to the shortness of time, I'm not going to read text 11, but I want to invite you on your own time to take a look where there's a little bit more of a mystical presentation of this very same idea about how the Kabbalists teach that God needs us to create a natural investment in our financial wellness and our health and our security, but ultimately create a space for God's blessings to come through as well. And so, my dear friends, we're almost at the close of our discussion. Yeah, we're pretty much at the close. I want to show you one final film, another very interesting thing. So in summation, let's take a look at the screen, or if you're online, here's some thoughts. You can't brood in the negative. That would hand the win to our haters. We want to reduce the panic by reminding ourselves of the context and the severity of the problem, but also where things are improving. We want to trust in God, our shepherd, feel his presence, but make sure to take action. And so until I talked about security and defense, but it also means calling our politicians and writing an op-ed if that's in your local paper and pushing back, and all the things that we're, God willing, going to discuss so much more at length in the coming weeks.
Rabbi?
Yes. Jeff?
I think the elections last night.
I really don't want to talk about elections right now. Do me a favor. I'm sorry. I'm sure what you're going to say is good, but I'm a little bit allergic to talking about politics on all sides. So let's maybe talk afterwards. But you want to make the comment, but without elections, or should we hold it till after the discussion? Then I'll follow.
We'll talk later.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I look forward to it. So where does this all leave us? I want to leave you with a crazy story. 1990, not that long ago. There was an event, great threat, and there was a great Jewish leader who you've heard me quote before, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. And I want to share with you a film about how he dealt with the situation of great threat and anti-Semitism. To do so, I'm going to have to tinker here with the slides. So there is a small chance, there's a small chance what's going to happen. So let's try our best. Bear with me a moment. Here, so I stop sharing the screen. So first of all, those that are in person, take a look at all the wonderful faces of the people that are with us. Sorry about that. Got a lot of cool people. Yeah, everyone that's in person, they can't see us. Sorry, guys, on the screen. But now, hold on, bear with me a moment. You see all those cool people? Yeah, so our in-person folks are waving. Hang on, let's try. Do you see, hold on, those that are on the, you see a screen with a picture of the Rebbe?
Yes.
Okay, check this out. You don't see it either.
Zoom down.
Oh, I know. Hold on. One more moment. Watch this. Boom. You see it?
Yeah. You see something.
All right.
No.
Now let's just hope that the internet's going to cooperate.
Went away.
Let's refresh.
Oh, there it is.
Let's close it.
A member of the Rebbe's secretariat.
Hold on. We're going to share it again.
Rabbi Binyamin Klein is a member of the Rebbe's secretariat.
Also, also wie schon kommen eine Idee, als begeht der Aschaf geht Bombardierung an der Sachplatz, nicht in dem Platz. Aber wisst den Platz, können Sie aber in der Welt, in der Sache in der Welt. Better abrochen.
The Prime Minister, just to paraphrase, the Prime Minister of Israel called the office of the Lubavitcher Rebbe because PLO was threatening to bomb a variety of Jewish sites, including the synagogue where the Rebbe was in 770. And the Prime Minister of Israel called the Rebbe to ask for a blessing that they should resolve the situation. And so this is Rabbi Klein, the Rebbe's secretary, and he continues the narrative.
Ik ging gewoon klap naar Rebbe stier, daar heb ik me geëffend, en dan zeggen die mensen, Rebbe toch niet meer wisten, die gewoon niet. Ik heb ook het aan mij, ja, naar bed, niet.
He knocked on the Rebbe's door, told him that that's a threat, and the Rebbe barely responded.
Ze komen bij mij, kann natürlich wissen, ich kann nicht, wenn ein Office mit Zeit, zwei Säger nicht da kein Office. Wenn ich reingehe, kommt zu mir, der Rebbe, es wird am Tag, und der Rebbe hat sich heute gedreht noch mir, und dann gehen wir reden wegen der Minion.
Es ist gekommen eine Idee, schon von Mincha, als Oshof hat auch gegeben, Rohr zu der Machloki seine Bechol Mokim Shuhu, als Hoyu Lissi, soll sich schöpfen mit Zähne Israel.
So the Rebbe didn't say anything, but after the afternoon services, he got up in 770 in his synagogue on the microphone. This is broadcast across the globe, and he shares that there's intelligence that the PLO wants to attack a number of Jewish targets.
Und schöpfen sich, wie bei sie kommt, der schöpfen sich, hat das Ayini verbunden mit Guf, Bechule, wilde Haare, Bedover, Hamepulsam.
They want to harm the Jewish people in a material, bodily way, to kill them. And he said, but he speaks in code, and he says, I don't want to elaborate on the negative.
Und beflatlich auf tief Tachpe, bemehli dich verstandig, am Bedarf Meshiv sein, Israel ein Kirche Melle bepe, wenn geht zu Kolonionen verbunden mit Pe, unebendig, von dem da gesoffen, dem da was Moduschkide.
So he says, I don't want to overemphasize the negative. He doesn't want to create panic. Number two, he right away goes into a positive and proactive response, a spiritual response with prayer. And a spiritual intervention will eliminate all of the negative plans they desire and even create more light by transforming and overcoming that
darkness.
Ja, der eine gibt dann zu gucken, einer guckt auf ihn. Das ist eine private Sache, ne? Darauf wollte ich mal sagen.
The Rebbe almost never divulged the fact that he was in constant consultation and conversation with Israeli intelligence and politicians. And so people are shocked that the Rebbe is imparting a piece of intelligence about a conversation with the Prime Minister of Israel.
Thankfully,
they were able to prevent those plans from being implemented.
And New York Times nicht wenn von dem Reben. New York Times sagen sich gewähne News, weil in der Zeit nicht wussten die News, das soll gewäne News.
So if you Google now and you go back in time, no one talks about in the New York Times about the Rebbe's role, but the Rebbe gave us a roadmap for a Jewish response to anti-Semitism, and that's really the point that I want to make over here.
Das gewäne Sache. Aber nicht weil der Rebbe ist.
A viele, wenn das verbunden ist mit der Loche, mit der Minig,
All right, we're going to stop the video over here. I don't want to share this. I will, God willing, I'll forward you the video. Hold on, now I just need to new share. Folks, we're almost done, but if you don't mind, stick around for another 2 minutes. I just want to close this session out with everybody. Nope. There we go. So, folks that are on Zoom, you hear me?
Yes.
All right. So what did the Rebbe do? Really fast. He said, there's an issue. We got to know about it. Let's not overemphasize it. And he doesn't want people to be panicked, because the panic, the anxiety, that's a win for the PLO. Then they don't even need to attack. They've already got us. What does he do? He emphasizes not just that he doesn't want to make a big deal, but people shouldn't panic. Should build trust in God and take action. In this context, the people in the synagogue were not in intelligence. They weren't in the IDF. Their response couldn't be on the defense front, but what their response could be is to proactively create healthy, good energy, spiritual energy, and bring God's good assistance, if you will, and God's support into the picture. And this, of course, is an important message that I'm sure you would expect to hear from a rabbi, but it's important that we hear it. We need to think less about panic and less about negativity, more faith and optimism, and remind ourselves that we need to also intervene. We need to take precautions. And so in a nutshell, don't panic, don't fear. We've been through this before. We're still here. We got to act, but allow God into the picture, allow God to help, And these are ideas that are hard to implement, but if we will, we'll be in a much more healthy place to begin to actually respond and to be proactive and to get involved when advocacy and effort and engagement is necessary, and it's almost always necessary. My dear friends, I want to thank you for joining us tonight for our first installment of a discussion all about anti-Semitism. Next week, we're going to talk about the why of anti-Semitism. Why does it persist? Where does it come from? What's the psychology of the haters? And the answers will also inform us about what and how to respond to all of to these different terrible events. So let's just close. Hang on.
Hello, Rabbi, do you hear me?
1 second. Yes, let's just
Lesson
close.
1.
Hold on. So just here, before we close out, you want to see other cool resources and stuff, you can go to myjli.com/anti-Semitism. If you didn't get a book, please call me, and before next Wednesday, we'll coordinate and arrange that you should get a book. That's number 2. Number 3, if you have a friend who maybe would do well to have a discussion about anti-Semitism that's a little more upbeat than the typical, positive, forward-thinking, but also going to give creative and good ideas, let them know they're welcome to join. And if they're going to say, I can't join because I missed the first class, well, God willing, I'll get them a recording. As long as the recording comes through here, I'll get the recording to them, and so that way they could join us. Hold on, in a second, I want to hear from everyone. I just got to get my technology up to date. All right, with that, I want to wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful evening. Looking forward to seeing you again. By the way, save the date. Hanukkah is in less than a month. And so lots of good and awesome stuff is coming our way, including the first night of Hanukkah beachside celebration. Please be there. I'm going to end recording, and we're going to be open for comments as long as you